The American sergeant couldn't look away. He stood there, frozen, his rifle hanging loose in his hands. His name was William Schramm, and he had seen 18 months of war. He'd seen friends die in his arms. He'd walked through fields of corpses. He thought nothing could shock him anymore. He was wrong. Hanging from the lamppost in front of him was an old man, maybe 65, maybe 70. He wore a baker's apron, now swaying gently in the spring breeze. Around his neck, tied with rough cord, was a piece of cardboard. Handwritten in black ink, it read, "Here hangs a traitor who believed in the Americans." But that wasn't what made Schramm's hands shake. 20 feet away, hanging from another post, was a teenage boy. He couldn't have been more than 17. His Hitler Youth uniform was too big for his thin frame. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. Then Schramm saw the woman. Then another body. Then another. His commanding officer walked up beside him. Didn't say a word, just stood there, counting 1, 2, 3, 7, 12, 15 corpses, all hanging like grotesque decorations along the main road into Aschaffenburg. These people hadn't been killed by Americans. They'd been murdered by their own commander. Their crime? They wanted to surrender. They wanted to save their city. They'd sewn white flags to hang from their windows. And for that, a Nazi fanatic named Major Emil Lambert had executed them. Schramm finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. What kind of monster does this to his own people? The officer next to him picked up his radio. His voice was ice cold, empty of emotion. Fire mission, all batteries, target, entire city grid, shoot until there's nothing left standing. This is the story of what happened next. The story of how one man's fanaticism destroyed a 1,000-year-old city. How American soldiers who came as liberators became destroyers. How a medieval fortress town was systematically erased from the map. This is the Battle of Aschaffenburg, and what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Good War. To understand why Aschaffenburg was destroyed, we need to understand the strategic situation in late March 1945. The Germany that had once conquered most of Europe was now a shrinking island of territory, crushed between two unstoppable forces. From the east, the Soviet Red Army, fueled by rage over Nazi atrocities, was advancing at terrifying speed, sometimes covering 30 miles a day. They had crossed the Oder River and were preparing for the final assault on Berlin. From the west, American, British, and Canadian forces had crossed the Rhine River on March 7, 1945, when American troops captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. It was the first crossing of the Rhine since Napoleon. The supposedly impregnable barrier that had protected Germany's industrial heartland was breached. General George S. Patton's Third Army was in the vanguard. Patton, the most aggressive American commander in Europe, had crossed the Rhine on March 22nd near Oppenheim. His forces were now racing through southern Germany, with virtually nothing standing in their way. His tanks were covering distances that seemed impossible, sometimes 40 or 50 miles in a single day. The German army that had blitzkrieged across Europe in 1940 no longer existed. What remained were scattered units, poorly equipped, often composed of old men and boys. The Luftwaffe was grounded for lack of fuel. The panzer divisions that had terrorized Europe were reduced to isolated tank platoons, hiding in villages, waiting to be overrun. Most German commanders understood the mathematics of defeat. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket, would commit suicide on April 21st rather than surrender. But he first ordered his troops to go home. In town after town, Wehrmacht officers were making pragmatic decisions. Save the soldiers, save the civilians, surrender with dignity. But not everyone accepted reality. There were still true believers, men who had been indoctrinated in Nazi ideology since the early 1930s, men who saw surrender as betrayal, who valued obedience to the Führer over human life, men like Major Emil Lambert, and they were about to turn a peaceful surrender into a bloodbath. Aschaffenburg was no ordinary German town. This was a city with over 1,000 years of history sitting on the banks of the main river in Bavaria. Its skyline was dominated by Schloss Johannesburg, a massive Renaissance fortress built between 1605 and 1614 from red sandstone quarried from nearby Miltenberg. The castle was an architectural masterpiece, 4 massive towers connected by thick walls, designed to withstand sieges in the age of gunpowder. Its walls were 8 feet thick in places. For 3 centuries, it had served as the second residence of the archbishops of Mainz, filled with priceless artwork, libraries containing medieval manuscripts, and chapels decorated by the finest Baroque craftsmen. The city itself was a living museum. Half-timbered houses from the 16th century lined cobblestone streets barely wide enough for a wagon. Church spires pierced the sky. St. Peter and Alexander, built in the 10th century, was one of the oldest churches in Germany. The Stiftskirche, with its Gothic architecture, had witnessed the baptisms, marriages, and funerals of generations spanning back to the Middle Ages. Before the war, Aschaffenburg had been home to approximately 40,000 people. It was known for its breweries, its clock-making industry, and its cultural heritage. Tourists would come to photograph the castle reflected in the Main River, to walk through the Schönbusch Park with its English garden design, to visit the museums and galleries. Families had lived here for centuries. The bakery on Herstallstrasse had been run by the same family since 1687. The bookshop near the market square had first opened its doors in 1704. Children played in squares where their great-great-great-grandparents had played. But by March 1945, the city's population had swelled. Refugees from the east, fleeing the advancing Soviet armies, had poured in. Women with children in their arms, old men pushing handcarts loaded with whatever possessions they could save. They came with stories of horror, of what the Red Army was doing in East Prussia, in Silesia, in Pomerania. The city now held perhaps 50,000 people, frightened civilians who had nowhere else to run, trapped between the hammer and the anvil of war. They thought they were safe. They thought Bavaria, in the American sector, would be liberated peacefully. They thought their nightmare was almost over. They couldn't have been more wrong. Standing between them in peace was Major Emil Lambert, and he was about to become their executioner. Emil Lambert was born in 1900, which meant he was 45 years old in March 1945. He had lived through the humiliation of Germany's defeat in World War I, experienced the chaos and hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic, and had been an early member of the Nazi Party, joining in the 1920s before Hitler's rise to power. Lambert wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was a true believer in National Socialism. He had internalized every word of Hitler's ideology. He believed in the Führer with religious fervor. For men like Lambert, Nazism wasn't just a political system. It was a worldview, a faith, a reason for existence. His military record shows a man obsessed with obedience and discipline. He had served on the Eastern Front, where he earned a reputation for ruthlessness. His commanders noted his exceptional dedication to National Socialist principles and his unwavering loyalty to the Führer. These weren't compliments about his tactical abilities. They were observations about his fanaticism. By March 1945, Lambert held the rank of major in the German army. He had been appointed the military commandant of Aschaffenburg and the surrounding region. His official title was Kampfkommandant, battle commander, a designation that said everything about what Hitler expected from him. On March 18, 1945, Lambert received a direct order from Hitler's headquarters. The message was brief but explicit. Aschaffenburg is designated as Festung Aschaffenburg, Fortress Aschaffenburg. You will defend the city to the last stone, the last man, the last bullet. This was part of Hitler's delusional strategy in the final months of the war. The Führer, hiding in his bunker beneath Berlin, was designating cities across Germany as fortresses that must be defended to the death. He believed that fanatical resistance would delay the Allies long enough for his imaginary wonder weapons to turn the tide, or for the Western Allies to make a separate peace and join Germany against the Soviets. It was madness. Any rational officer could see that. But for Lambert, it was gospel. It was the word of his God. He immediately began implementing his defense plan. The problem was that he had almost no regular troops. The Wehrmacht units that had been stationed in the area had been pulled east to defend against the Red Army, or west to defend the Rhine. What Lambert had were scraps, maybe 50 regular soldiers, some police officers, and members of the Volksturm. The Volksturm, the People's Storm, was Hitler's last desperate gamble. Created in September 1944, it was a militia composed of males aged 16 to 60 who who were not already in military service. These were the old men with arthritis, the factory workers with hernias, the boys too young to shave. They received minimal training, often just a few hours of instruction on how to load a rifle. They were issued whatever weapons could be found. World War I, Gewehr. 98 rifles that were older than many of the men carrying them, hunting shotguns, a handful of Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets that came with illustrated instructions because most couldn't read tactical manuals. Lambert assembled approximately 1,500 of these reluctant warriors in the castle courtyard. Witnesses later reported that many of the Volksturm members were visibly terrified. They had wives, children, homes they wanted to protect. They knew the war was lost. You'd have to be blind and deaf not to know. They didn't want to fight. One survivor, a former teacher named Heinrich Müller, who was forced into the Volksturm, later testified, "We all knew it was suicide. The Americans had unlimited tanks, unlimited ammunition, unlimited everything. We had old men and boys with 5 bullets each." But Lambert, his eyes when he spoke about defending the city, they were the eyes of a madman. Lambert gave them no choice. According to multiple survivor testimonies, he made a speech that combined ideology with naked threats. The Americans are not liberators. They are Jewish-controlled criminals who will burn, rape, and murder. We will fight for every street, every building, every stone. This is our sacred duty to the Führer. Anyone who refuses to fight is a traitor. Anyone who attempts to surrender is a traitor. Anyone who displays a white flag is a traitor to Germany, to the Führer, and to the German people. And traitors will be executed immediately, without trial. He wasn't bluffing, and the people of Aschaffenburg were about to learn that the hard way. On the morning of March 28th, before the Americans even entered the city outskirts, Lambert's Gestapo assistants and SS personnel began patrolling the streets. They were looking for signs of defeatism, signs of traitor behavior. They found them everywhere. In cellars and back rooms across Aschaffenburg, families had been quietly preparing for the end. They had sewn white sheets together to make flags of surrender. They had practiced English. Phrases, "We surrender," "Please don't shoot," "We have children here." They had written signs in broken English and painted them on boards to display in their windows. They believed, naively, desperately, that when the Americans came, these white flags would save their homes from artillery fire, would spare their children from the violence of urban combat. They had heard that Americans were reasonable, that they accepted surrenders, that they didn't shoot civilians. They were right about the Americans. White flags would have saved them from American artillery. But they couldn't save them from Lambert. The executions began at dawn, around 6 a.m. The first victim was Johann Drescher, a 52-year-old baker who owned a small shop on Herstallstrasse. His family had run that bakery for 7 generations. He was a quiet man, apolitical, who just wanted to keep making bread and keep his family alive. On the morning of March 27th, he had gathered bedsheets from his neighbors in the apartment building. Together, they had sewn a large white flag about 6 feet across. They planned to hang it from the building's facade when the Americans arrived. Someone informed on them, probably a Hitler Youth member or a devoted Nazi Party member. At 6:15 a.m. on March 28th, 2 Gestapo agents and 3 SS soldiers kicked in Drescher's door. They found the white flag folded on his kitchen table. They dragged him into the street in front of his wife and 3 daughters, ages 14, 16, and 19. They hanged him from a lamppost, 50 feet from his own bakery. His wife screamed and tried to cut him down. An SS soldier hit her in the face with his rifle butt, breaking her jaw. The cardboard sign around Drescher's neck read, "Here hangs a traitor who believed in Jewish lies." His body hung there for 6 days, visible to everyone who passed. His daughters had to walk past their father's corpse to fetch water from the communal pump. The second victim was Margareta Bauernschmidt, a 64-year-old widow who had lost her husband and 2 sons on the Eastern Front. She had already given everything to this war. All she wanted was for it to end. On March 27th, she had been standing in a bread line when a Volksturm officer walked past, recruiting more men for the defense. Margaret, exhausted and grief-stricken, said loud enough for others to hear, "This is pointless. The war is lost. Why are we killing our own children for a madman in Berlin?" Someone reported her. That evening, Lambert's men arrested her. They didn't even bother with a pretense of a trial. At dawn on March 28th, She was hanged in the Rossmarkt Square, the main marketplace where she had shopped for vegetables every week for 40 years. The sign around her neck said, "This is the fate of defeatists and cowards." But the most heartbreaking cases were the teenagers. Klaus Müller was 17 years old, a member of the Hitler Youth who had been conscripted into Lambert's defense force. He'd been in the Hitler Youth since age 10, 7 years of indoctrination, of Heil Hitler salutes, of marching songs and loyalty oaths. But when he saw the American tanks approaching and realized he was expected to fight them with a World War I rifle and 8 bullets, something broke inside him. The propaganda crumbled, the ideology evaporated. He just wanted to live. On the night of March 27th, Klaus removed his uniform, put on civilian clothes, and tried to hide in the attic of a friend's house. Someone saw him. Someone told Lambert's men. They found him at 4 and 8 a.m., dragged him out in his civilian clothes, and hanged him in the Rossmarkt Square next to Margareta Bauernschmidt's body. His mother arrived just in time to see her son's body swaying in the wind. She collapsed. She never fully recovered her sanity. By noon on March 28th, there were approximately 19 bodies hanging from lampposts along the main southern and western approaches to Aschaffenburg. Lambert had positioned them specifically where the Americans would see them first. A message, a warning, a declaration of his fanaticism. And then the Americans arrived. The 45th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Thunderbirds, was one of the most distinguished units in the American Army. Originally a National Guard division drawing troops from Oklahoma, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, they had been federalized in 1941 and had seen continuous combat since the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. These men were battle-hardened veterans. They had fought through Sicily in summer heat, seeing buddies die on dusty roads. They had survived the bloody landings at Salerno, where German defenders nearly pushed them back into the sea. They had slogged through the Italian campaign, fighting for every hill, every river crossing, every village. They had participated in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France, and had fought their way through the Vosges Mountains and some of the most brutal winter combat of the war. By March 1945, many of the original 1943 members were gone, killed, wounded, or rotated home. But those who remained were hard men, experienced in the ugly realities of war. They had stopped being idealistic soldiers and had become professional killers who just wanted to finish the job and go home. The division was commanded by Major General Robert T. Frederick, a legendary Special Forces officer. But the immediate tactical command of the Aschaffenburg operation fell to Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment. Felix Sparks was just 27 years old, but he looked 40. He had joined the division as a second lieutenant fresh out of officer training and had fought his way up through the ranks through sheer competence and courage. He was tough, pragmatic, and fiercely protective of his men. In just a few weeks, Sparks would become famous and controversial for Liberated.